Alright, what's going on, you guys? Nick here with Nick's Around the Power. So I want to do a video on who I believe was the greatest rivalry in bodybuilding history. Now, of course, we had Arnold Schwarzenegger versus Sergio Oliva. That was a very great rivalry, a very intense rivalry. You, of course, had Mike Mentzer versus Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was very bitter about Arnold Schwarzenegger winning the 1980 Mr. Olympia when Mike Mentzer placed fourth. You had Dorian Yates versus Nasser El Sambadi. That was a very bitter rivalry. You had Cutler and Ronnie Coleman. That was a very intense rivalry as well. But at the end of the day, I don't think there was any true bad blood between Jay and Ronnie. In fact, it seems like they're actually friends now, and at many points during their actual rivalry, it seems like they actually got along pretty well too. The fact that they did guest posing together in the off-season in between Olympias showed that they were actually pretty good friends. So I think in the history of bodybuilding and in the history of the Mr. Olympia in particular, the most intense and the most impactful rivalry of all time has been Kai Greene versus Phil Heath. So it probably really started in 2011, where for the first time ever, Kai Greene placed in the top 3 of the Mr. Olympia, and he was going toe-to-toe with Phil Heath for the first time. Following that, in 2012, 2013, and 2014, all of those years, Kai Greene placed second to Phil Heath. And then it really all culminated to a boiling point in 2014, where Kai Greene and Phil Heath almost got into a physical altercation on stage. Now, this has never happened in the history of the Mr. Olympia, where you had two bodybuilders about to physically fight on stage, actually physically fight. Now, some people will say this was staged, this was all for hype. Whatever the case may be, this was a historic moment for the Olympia, something that's never been seen on the stage before. So I think that fact in and of itself would be enough to make this the greatest rivalry of all time. But that's not all that contributes to the factors that makes this one of the most impactful rivalries in bodybuilding. I think another important fact was the fact that social media was not around until this rivalry came about. So for all these other rivalries, Jay versus Ronnie, social media was just in its beginning stages. Dorian versus Nasser, there wasn't social media. Obviously with Arnold versus Sergio, there wasn't social media. But with Kai Greene and Phil Heath, this rivalry sparked a tremendous social media backlash. I don't think ever in the history of the sport have we seen so much hatred towards a reigning Mr. Olympia than we've seen with Phil Heath. And this is a product of social media. And I think largely it was catalyzed by the Kai Greene rivalry. Now, the bubble gut thing definitely played a role. But I think people really started to look for and criticize every little detail about Phil Heath when the Kai Greene rivalry really began. Because Kai Greene and Phil Heath, the truth of the matter is, when they were going 1-2 at the Olympia, they were very, very close some of those years. And some of those years, you could definitely make a case for either man winning the Olympia that particular year. And the fans of each guy definitely did make that case and made their opinions known on social media. So social media played a very big element in this rivalry, and it really made it bitter to the point where Kai Greene did not compete in the 2015 Olympia. Now, a lot of people say it's because of the Phil Heath thing. A lot of people say it's due to contract issues. A lot of people say it's due to issues with the promoters. But I think the culmination of 2014 being this near fight on stage, Kai Greene arguably almost wins the 2014 Olympia, does not come back to try again in 2015. And many fans would say that if Kai Greene had showed up in 2015, he could have won that year's Olympia. They say that was his Olympia to win, but he did not compete. So I think that Kai Greene versus Phil Heath is, number one, the most talked about rivalry in the history of bodybuilding. I don't think anyone has talked about a rivalry more. I don't think anyone has got more heated and impassioned about a rivalry than Kai Greene versus Phil Heath. Obviously, Kai Greene has millions of fans around the world, obviously indicative of his social media numbers. And Phil Heath, obviously being the reigning Mr. Olympia multiple times, obviously has a massive social media following of his own. So when these fans went against each other, not only did it create a lot of attention towards the rivalry, but that rivalry itself brought a lot of attention to bodybuilding in general. It brought a lot of interest to the Mr. Olympia. It brought a lot of interest to bodybuilding. So I think in terms of overall impact, bringing people to the sport, Kai Greene versus Phil Heath is the most and best rivalry in the history of bodybuilding. And just the notion that they could ever go head-to-head on stage still, despite the fact that Kai Greene has not competed since 2014 at the Olympia, just the rumors and the myths that Kai Greene could come back stimulates a tremendous amount of interest in the Mr. Olympia, even years after this rivalry has ended. So that's how impactful this rivalry really was, and that's why I feel that Kai Greene versus Phil Heath is the most impactful rivalry in the history of bodybuilding. So let me know in the comment section below if you think there's a more impactful rivalry in bodybuilding. Please give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Nick Strength and Power, signing out.